So, I had zero intention of sleeping in my car that night. I was out with some friends in downtown St. Louis, bar hopping. Just enjoying the night, you know. But then I lost track of how much I'd been drinking. By the time it hit me, I was way too hammered to drive. But I didn't want to blow money on a hotel or figure out an Uber back to the suburbs. So I made the dumb decision to sleep it off in my car. I ended up parking in this small, mostly empty lot near the riverfront. It seemed quiet enough. No sketchy vibes. At least at first. My car is an old sedan. Not exactly built for comfort, but I tried to make the back seat work. Grabbed a ratty sweatshirt from the trunk to use as a pillow. Cracked the windows down, just enough for air. The streetlights were flickering above, giving off this weird, eerie glow, but I was too tired and too buzzed to care. Eventually, I drifted off. But at around 2 a.m., I woke up to this tapping on my window. My first thought? Great. A cop's gonna bust me for sleeping here. But nope. It wasn't a cop. I squint out the window, and there's this figure standing there, right up against the glass. The light from the street barely hitting them. Just enough to make out the shape of someone in a hoodie, standing way too close to my car for comfort. I tried to play it cool, thinking maybe they'd go away if I didn't react. But then they started circling the car, slowly, dragging their fingers along the glass. My heart was pounding. They stopped at the driver's side door, and I hear them try the handle. Thank God I'd locked it. Then they moved to the back window, where I was laying down, and pressed their face against the glass. I couldn't see their face clearly, just the shadowy outline of eyes staring at me. I didn't move, barely breathed, just hoping that they'd get bored and leave. After what felt like forever, they stepped back, but I didn't hear them walk away. I stayed frozen, trying to figure out if they were still there. Finally, I worked up the nerve to sit up and peek out the windshield. And they were there, standing like 10 feet in front of my car, just staring, not moving. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, but suddenly I had them. Hands shaking as I started the car. The second the headlights flicked on, they bolted, running off into the darkness. I didn't stick around to see where they went. I just floored it out of there, driving until I found a busy, well-lit gas station where I stayed the rest of the night. Doors locked, headlights on, wide awake. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even now, whenever I drive past that part of town, I catch myself glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that figure again, lurking in the shadows. I used to work at a dog boarding facility, built on an old dump site. All of us who did overnights had stories. My first experience was getting out of the shower around 10 p.m. The entire building was locked by me, and there was a Ring camera at the front door. Someone knocked on the bathroom door. I got no notification from the Ring camera, and I don't know why, but I thought a coworker had come by, because they would knock on the bathroom door, knowing I was the only one in there. So, I said, "Hello?" twice, and got no answer. I finally opened the door. To nothing. I checked the security cams, and all you see is me peering out into the hallway. Nothing in the rest of the building. Later on, sometime around 4 a.m., I was awoken to what sounded exactly like my own voice, saying, "Hello?" outside of the bedroom. Every time before bed, we would put calming music on for the dogs on all of the Alexas in different rooms of the huge house. One morning, I woke up, and they were all somehow off, except for the one in the kitchen that was quietly playing a song very dear to me. As soon as I shut the bathroom door, it stopped. I then went to another wing of the house to start letting the dogs out. And when I let them back in, the same song came on, with no prompting, on a different Alexa. This just happened to me last week, and I'm still a little shaken up. So, I work as a warehouse manager for a construction company in the Bay Area. We recently got news that we were shutting down, so they're having us clean it out. In one of the back rooms holds our tools, but also the belongings to our former manager. She passed away a few years ago, and they stored all of her stuff in the warehouse. There were boxes of clothes, shoes, files, and old china sets. The china sets were nice, but somewhat old. So I ask if I can take them to sell, and my manager says that I can go ahead and do that. I load 2 of the 4 boxes into the back of my car. At this point, I feel very anxious and keep hearing thumping noises. But when I load the 3rd box of china, this one from Japan, I start to head back inside to grab the last box. Then, all of a sudden, I smell this strong scent of smoke deep in my nose, to the point that it was all I could smell. So I turn around, and the 3rd box I had just put in seconds ago was burned all around. My heart instantly sank to the bottom of my stomach, and I felt as though I was being watched. I put it all back where I got it from, and immediately left. I think something is attached to that china, and I don't want anything to do with it. This happened to me 2 years ago now, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I've always tried to rationalize it, but never could. I live in the countryside of Ireland, right in the middle of nowhere, so it's very rare that I hear noises outside. And when I do, 99% of the time, it's a cow that's escaped the field beside us into our garden, or our dog barking at a person walking by. But there's still that 1% of the time, and I can't explain what the 1% was. This happened on some night in late spring. The night was dark and clear. I could see every star in the sky. At around midnight, I went into the kitchen to get a midnight snack. Normal teenager activities. As I was getting my snack, I started hearing noises outside. I didn't think much of it, assuming it was probably some sort of animal, but it only got louder. So, I opened the window to try to get a better look, or to be able to hear it better. And all that I could see was my dog, standing beside the back door, not taking his eyes off the forest behind our house. But the noise was one of the worst things I've ever heard. The only way I could possibly explain it is it sounded like metal being scraped, but more croaky, I guess. What worried me most was how my dog wasn't barking at whatever it was. She was scared, which is unlike her, and she was a big dog. The fact she wasn't barking made me believe it wasn't an animal, as my dog wouldn't have hesitated to get to it. But I couldn't explain it, so I brought the dog inside and went back to bed. but it felt like the sound followed me to my room. Now the sound was at the front of my house, which didn't make any sense how it got there so quickly. I decided to shut my curtains to try to get some sleep. And as soon as I pulled the covers over me, there was a tap on my window. I stayed under the covers, listening to it, and it was a constant tap, tap, tap. It sounded like little stones being thrown at my window. This carried on for I don't know how long. But I fell asleep eventually. And the next day, I started talking to my neighbors, and I found out a man had moved into the house just around the corner from us. I asked around, and found out things about him. He was supposedly not a law-abiding citizen. He had many run-ins with the guards, and it was said he was a major drug dealer, and probably on some major drugs. A month later, there was a massive amount of weed and other drugs found in a shed down the road from me, and I never saw that man again. What I believe happened that night was that the druggie was trying to torment me while he was high, but I have no idea how he was able to make that sound for at least 3 hours straight, and then run around my house in less than a few seconds. And how long was he there for? Because he timed it perfectly. It really just doesn't make any sense to me. What I still wonder to this day is, what would have happened to me if I went to see what it was tapping at my window? What were his, or its, intentions? I'm a truck driver who does line haul out of Reno, Nevada. I've only had a few strange occurrences, but here they are. One time, I was on my way back from Independence, California, and I stopped at a vista point on the 395 near Mammoth Lake to take a nap. This was during early winter. It was around 4 a.m. and about 25 degrees outside. I got up from my nap, went outside to pee, and have a smoke. I noticed a flashlight about 200 feet away. It was scanning around, wildly, but not in my direction. There was nothing out there, and absolutely no reason for a person to be where they were. After finishing my smoke, I climbed back into the cab, and while looking towards the flashlight, I turned on my marker lights. Immediately, the light pointed directly towards my location, and then went dark. Another time, on the same road, I woke up from a nap to the sound of somebody banging their hands along the length of my trailers. There was a light fog, and I couldn't see anyone, but the sound was unmistakable. I didn't stick around, though, and got out of there ASAP. Lastly, one time I was making my way on Route 139 in California. There is a campground along the way, and I pulled over to take a piss. It was a new moon, so the night sky was incredible. So many stars. It was so dark out that the orange marker lights from my truck were casting my shadow on the surrounding wilderness. Out of nowhere, I heard the sound of rustling in the distance, and then a figure emerged. It was a man, watching me from the shadows. Needless to say, I got the hell out of there. For what it's worth, those are the only strange occurrences I've ever had as a truck driver. Nothing too scary, just weird. Hey, it's Steven again. Lots of support and recognition on my last story I posted in this community. And as promised, here's my other story from the nature preserve. If you didn't read my last story, I live by this nature preserve on a dark road, which has hiking, frisbee golf, a park, blah blah blah. Now, I'm going to be honest. If you thought my last story was scary, this one is downright terrifying. So, yeah. So I'm about 13 to 14 at the time, and it's summertime. And during the summer, me and my friends love to go on the trails at the nature preserve at night, because it's quite creepy, and we love adrenaline. Now, most of the trails are quite short, but one of them is 2.5 miles long, that goes through about half of the entire nature preserve. We've been scared to go down this trail at night, but this time, we finally decided to face our fears and go for it. So we go down the trail, and the trail is this gravel road, and it's quite wide. So we are all next to each other, on our bikes, and it's about 6 of us. Now, this trail is surrounded by woods, completely, and there is no light. And to make it extra creepy, we decided not to use any flashlights, which was a terrible idea, and you'll see why later on in the story. So we're going down this trail, and out of nowhere, we see about 8 deer in the middle of the trail, just standing there. For some reason, my friend has a fear of deer, and he's like panicking, and tries to go back. But we didn't want to let him go by himself. And we also didn't want to leave the trail, so we kind of forced him to stay. Out of nowhere, the deer start running into the woods, as if they were startled by a potential predator. And you know how when you're in the woods, you hear all the crickets, frogs, etc., right? That all went quiet. So it goes to complete utter silence, and we're all freaked the F out, standing in the middle of the trail, expecting a bear or something to pop out. We stay in the spot for about another minute or two, until all the sounds come back, and everything seems to be normal. Now, I don't know why, but even after that, we still had the will to keep going down the trail. So we continue to go down the trail, and out of nowhere, the trail gets very narrow, like about 5 feet wide, and we didn't realize, so we all just go straight into the woods, off the trail, and eat shit. It took a little bit to recuperate, but we got into a straight line, and went down the narrow trail. At this point, the trail went from gravel road to just a small narrow dirt path. Now, the following moments are by far the scariest moments of my life. We're going down the narrow path, and I randomly looked to my right and noticed a bit of light, and noticed we are next to a road in the distance, meaning we are nearing the end of the trail. Now, I'm looking at this road, and I'm not paying attention to what's in front of me, and I run straight into the person in front of me, and it was like a domino effect. We all fell down. As I'm getting back up, I start to hear the sound of wood knocking all around me, and we all hear it, and we were like, what the fuck? And then we hear people talking. You know what it sounds like to be in a room full of people talking, so you hear people talking but can't really make out what they're saying? That's what it was like. And then the voices stopped, and we noticed a silhouette on the road, in the distance, just standing, looking right at us. And we take this as a sign to turn around and leave. And so we race back. As we're riding back, as fast as we can, my bike chain breaks, so we stop and fix it, as fast as we can. And as we're fixing it, the woods went quiet again, and I hear extremely heavy footsteps, and we book it the fuck out of there. As we exit the trail and get back onto the road that my neighborhood is on, we hear what sounded like a woman's screech coming from the trail, and we race home, and never went back to that trail again. I'm a graveyard nerd. It's quiet there, and with beautiful landscaping. A great place to take reflective walks. One day, it was very hot, and I wanted to sit down. closest thing besides the ground was a crypt that sat alone in the fork of one of the paths. I very respectfully said, "Please, may I sit here and rest a while," as I climbed on top. Almost immediately, I felt 2 knocks underneath me. I told myself it's my imagination. 2 more knocks. I say out loud, "I mean you no disrespect. Knock twice more, if you just want me to leave." It hesitated. Then 2 distinct hard knocks hit me right in the bum, where I sat. I said, okay, I'm going." Another time, I went near dark. I've walked through the children's section many times. I've seen the toys that people place on the children's graves. Some of them look 50+ years old. This night, I didn't just walk past them. I stopped and thanked them all for coming here and trying to fulfill their destiny in some way, and told them that I'm sorry it was cut so short. As soon as I said, "Rest in peace," one of those old decrepit toys began to flash little lights and play music. My significant other noped all the way to the car. I actually stayed and tried to talk, but nothing else happened. Lastly, I went to a different graveyard this time. In an old Moravian graveyard, with graves as far back as the 1500s. Maybe earlier, but I couldn't read them all. This graveyard has huge hills with mausoleums tucked into the hills. I like to sit on top of one and look out over the whole place. Very serene. This day, and watched a fox spinning circles way down at the bottom of the hill. He acted confused, like he had rabies. I wasn't going to move until he left, so I waited. Suddenly, a woman came from somewhere, but I don't know where because I could see the whole place. She walked towards a grave near where that fox was spinning around. I got worried for her and stood up to scream down to her that there was a rabid fox and to run away. But when I stood up, she wasn't there anymore. I waited for the fox to show itself again, but it too was gone. Just like that. Gone. I very cautiously climbed down and went down the hill to where I saw all of this happen. No woman, no fox, nothing but quiet graves and beautiful flowers. A few weeks ago, my dad left home to go work in Mindanao. I was excited, since he was going to be bringing gifts, such as food and toys. A week or two later, perhaps in the afternoon, I heard a familiar voice. It was my dad, and my mom was talking to him. I sighed and focused on my iPad. A few minutes later, my dad knocked on the door. When I opened it, I saw him. He wore a gray shirt. Why am I mentioning this? This is important for later. Me and my dad hugged each other and talked for a bit. I don't remember much about the conversation, but I do remember him saying, "Tomorrow, I'll show you something." And he was acting really weird. But he's a weird guy, so I didn't mind it. After that, I went to sleep. A few hours later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I was a bit dizzy, so I went to get a glass of water. When I checked my parents' room, I saw that only my mom is there. I asked, "Ma, where's Dad? Did he leave?" Mom replied, "What? Your dad is still in DeVeo." I was completely flabbergasted. If Dad was still in DeVeo, then who the hell did I hug? I explained to my mom about what happened, and that I literally heard her talking to my dad, but she denied it. The next morning, I talked to my mom about going to the mall. Mom was feeling unwell, so she said that Dad can let me go to SM when he comes back. That's when the memory of what happened last night flooded back. I told her what happened again, and she was as shocked as me. Then she called my dad. I started freaking out when he said he was wearing a gray shirt the day before. A few weeks later, and I somewhat forgot about the experience. My mom walked up to me and asked if I went to their bedroom and opened the closet. I said no, and she said that she saw someone opening the closet. She didn't mind it since she thought it was me, and obviously it wasn't. I stayed up all night, so my friend who was staying with me didn't leave the room. I didn't leave either, since I was too busy watching TikTok. Dad thinks someone is haunting this area. I don't think the house is haunted, since no one died in the house. Plus, my dad built it. My theory is that an Encanto is toying with us. Encantos are deities, or nature spirits, that Filipinos used to worship and respect during the pre-colonial times. Although this theory could easily be disproven, perhaps a gust of wind could have opened the closet. The only question I have is, who the hell did I give a hug to a few weeks ago? If it's not my father, then who was it? Two years ago, a few nights before Thanksgiving, a man known around town by the name of Derek approached me while I was alone at the front desk of the hotel I worked at downtown. A guest witnessed this exchange, froze, and began to cry in fear for me because she didn't know exactly what was happening. She just knew that something was very wrong, and I knew that I couldn't let her know how dangerous the situation had suddenly become. I knew from the moment that we made eye contact that Derek was in an unhinged state. His eyes were full of tears. He stared at me for 30 seconds, reeking of alcohol and cigarettes, and evidently on a more serious substance. Time stopped. I knew then I could not look away. I could not freeze up or run, or something very bad would happen. My life is a nightmare, he said. He was probably just looking for a safe, comfortable place to stay a while, after the police tore down the downtown homeless encampment a few years ago. Many have fallen through the cracks. "Do you think I should kill myself today?" he asked. "Today seems like a good last day to me." He began to speak in cut-off phrases and slurs, his eyes welling with tears, but none fell. He mentioned something about hating women and not trusting them, feeling alone and spurned by them. And for some reason, he chose me to take this out on. I still wonder why. I think it was the beauty of the hotel that drew him in, and I didn't have the heart, the skills, or warning on how to make someone in such a crisis like that leave the building. It is such a stark contrast inside the hotel and the alley behind. I tried to help him. At first, it seemed like he just needed someone to listen for a minute, and he would be on his way. But he refused to leave. The bar was still open, but there was no one available to assist me. I relive this moment sometimes, and I still feel the fear of not knowing if he was going to pull his hands out of his pockets, where they nervously moved around. Derek started behaving erratically, clutching at his clothes. He asked me, Do you hate me? Is it because I'm black? Why can't I be happy? I have never met someone who refused to break eye contact like that. I truly think he was ready to end his own life in front of me in the lobby. I tried to not freak out any of the guests and keep the situation calm. But I just started crying, and I gave him my cheesecake. And I think maybe that act of kindness talked him off the ledge. He kept dropping things, and after I calmed him down, he even started trying to light a cigarette a few times. Smoking inside hasn't been legal since the 70s. At one point, he curled up on the sofa in the lobby and rocked back and forth, and left, and came back several times within a 15-minute period. Finally, after what seemed like half an hour, he left for good, and I called the police. But, as far as I know, nothing came of it. Derek came back for weeks, trying to find me again. I did not engage again, and still live in fear. He will see me from across the way and kill me, or himself. He legitimately seemed to be trying to agitate me, so I would, quote unquote, call the police so they can shoot me already. But still, I tried my best every day at work to not only be a good employee, but a good person. It's only years later I realized I was never offered time off, and perhaps should have been. During a meeting with management, I was denied a raise because of my nervous energy, and they told me I was too close to earning a raise. I froze, shocked that she couldn't understand why I was experiencing PTSD from the situations I've handled. I decided then to leave the hotel for the first time, because I felt like an indentured servant, given the rate of pay compared to the amount of work I was putting in. I would never see a truly livable wage as a single woman. Why am I being forced to do the job of the highest paid in the city, yet I am paid almost the least? Rent for a studio apartment was $750 4 years ago. Now I can't find anything under $1,200. The manager of the hotel is paid $120K a year. I was not allowed to accept tips, and I did not receive commissions on minimum wage. The hotel brought in hundreds of thousands every 2 weeks, yet there was never enough money to replace the carpets or pay me a livable wage, let alone do anything to actually help the homeless that wander in. It is more than frustrating to be paid this little when it takes a lot of skill to navigate these perplexing social situations, night after night, without security, and at a time where police and public relations are struggling. Derek saw me months later, from afar, in a nearby music venue, and came up again after staring far too long. "Hey, do I know you?" I left immediately. This is one of the main reasons I do not go out much anymore, to the bar or club scene in my city. I left the hotel industry a few months ago, after realizing how expendable I really am to the corporate entity. How expendable people like Derek are to them. They knew I deserved more than minimum wage, but they do not care, as long as the shareholders have the lion's cut. They know Derek and hundreds of others on the street need help, but what they care most about is capitalizing off of a building that could be housing for those in need. I know it is not that simple, but 5 years ago this building was a retirement home, a not-for-profit business, not a for-profit business. In the last 5 years, the number of elderly and young people sleeping on the streets has skyrocketed. People are literally dying in the alleyways. I had to watch an older officer once with his head between his knees because he couldn't save someone overdosing on fentanyl. A few days before Christmas, a young man locked themselves in the bathroom and legitimately screamed for minutes on end, only to emerge laughing. I know this isn't a crisis that can be solved easily or overnight. A business can't just open its doors to everyone, and it's not their responsibility, per se, but I can't keep watching this happen and say and do nothing. I can only complain so much. I certainly sometimes wish I could unsee some of the horrible things I've witnessed. I certainly wish I could come up with a viable solution to all of this. But at least I am not living the nightmare that Derek is. I'm honestly kinda glad I could be there for him. But it wrecked me for a while. I have about a dozen stories like this, having worked in the hotels downtown over the last 3 years. I had to witness a particularly dreadful story from a woman around the age of 60 who had been mugged outside, had her social security check stolen from her, and lost her parents the same month, sporting a black eye to prove it, while the owner sat 2 seats away, coincidentally eating the same type of cheesecake I offered to Derek. I fucking wish I was making this shit up. They do say truth is stranger than fiction. But Jesus Christ, I mean, come on. The irony is ridiculous. The worst part of the story is there is no one to help, except Nathan, one of the braver 18-year-old RSU officers. Likely a purposeful police tactic to defuse situations. Only, it works sometimes. And others, it puts practically kids in the middle of a fucked up nightmare. But, I guess, what's new? Human civilization has been using eager, idealistic young folks for war since before history. A few years ago, when my daughter was a toddler, my wife and I used to take her to a nearby lake to picnic, swim, and just unwind. It was a peaceful spot. Quiet, not too crowded. The kind of place where you could easily forget about the world for a while. One afternoon, after we'd finished eating, my wife decided to go for a quick swim while I stayed on the beach with our daughter. I watched her wade out into the water, the sun sparkling on the surface. A minute later, she suddenly stopped and turned to me, shouting something. At first, I couldn't make out what she said, but her expression was off. Then I heard her, clearly. "I think I just stepped on someone's face." I froze for a second, thinking maybe she was joking. But the look on her face wasn't playful. It was pale, almost terrified. She quickly started making her way back to the shore, her legs moving faster, like she couldn't get out of the water fast enough. When she got back to me, she was visibly shaken. She said that while she was swimming, her foot brushed up against something soft. And at first, she thought it was a rock, or a weird patch of seaweed. But when she pressed her foot down, she felt the unmistakable shape of a face beneath the water. A nose. An eye socket. She swore she felt the hollow of the eye. I considered going in to check it out, but something stopped me. The unease in my gut, maybe. We decided to pack up and leave right after that. The next day, the local news reported that a young boy, who had been missing for days, was found drowned in that same lake, not far from where we had been. He'd been there the whole time, just beneath the surface. To this day, my wife is convinced that she stepped on his face. It seems pretty harmless, just listening to the story. But I think the creepiest part is always when you think about what could have happened. Or what was in the mind of these two grown-ass men. So basically, to just introduce you real quick to my relatives. My two sisters, my brother-in-law, my cousins, and her boyfriend, who is the brother of my brother-in-law, and my other cousin, were on our basic, like every summer holiday, in Montenegro. There maybe was another cousin with a friend of hers as well, but I'm not really sure. We were out in the town, in Old Town, of Ulsange. We stayed very long, since some of us were really in the mood for partying and all that. So as the night comes to an end, and the clubs slowly start emptying, we decide to leave as well. We talk before we get into our cars, and agree onto all staying at my cousin's house for the rest of the night when we get home. The girls go home. The boys stop at the shop by the road to grab some snacks and drinks and go home as well. Our car, the one with the guys, was in front of the car where the girls were, but we somehow forgot to stop by the shop. The girls noticed and stopped there instead of us to grab the snacks. As my elder sisters explain, there were two guys who wanted to talk to my younger sister, right at the cash register. Somehow, my younger sister did notice them, but wasn't aware that they were talking to her. To be honest, I don't remember if any of the girls told the guys anything, like to leave them alone or something, or if they just ignored them. So, they bought what they needed, got in the car, and noticed that the two guys were following them, driving behind them. I have to interrupt here, but this alone is just crazy, especially because none of them gave any sign of any kind of interest, and then also because it was two guys and not one. This means they supported each other, and neither of them told the other to just let it be. Crazy. So, as my older sister is driving, she drives purposely slower, so she can be sure if they are really following them. And if so, that the followers don't lose them. The girls basically wanted to lure them home, knowing that the boys have already arrived home earlier. Again, these guys that were following them had enough time to just take a turn, because the roads are very narrow anyway. And it was the middle of the night. They knew they could only be driving home. And from the little shop to the house is like a 5-minute drive. I know it's short, but it should be enough for two grown-ass men to figure out that they should just turn around. I constantly have a picture of them blindly following into those narrow roads of our neighborhood, just because they can't keep their hormones together, like some animals. Just disgusting. So, as they arrive right in the front gate of my cousin's house, she steps out of the car, all hectic, and calls her boyfriend and brother-in-law. They didn't know what was going on, but as they approached the gate, they saw this other car right behind them. The guys in the car saw the guys at the gate, and drew the slowest and most shameful drive of shame backwards to get out of the neighborhood. Because, narrow roads. We then laughed about it a little, and thought it was hilarious, especially the way they were driving away backwards. But honestly, still a little bit creepy, that some people out there just can't control their urges. This true story takes place just over this last weekend, and I need to get it off my chest. Many women go through their life on the side of caution, and more often than not, have a story about sexual assault. This story is not about me, but what I had witnessed, my visceral instincts, and to bring awareness. My friend and I, both women in our mid-20s, went out for a few drinks at the club to dance and get hit on. Usually at bars, women are super friendly towards each other. So, we are dancing on the dance floor, having a blast. We meet these girls, presumably around the same age. One of the girls is wearing a red dress, and the other is wearing a floral dress. I never caught their names, but it seemed they had been at this club for a while, because they seemed tipsy, or maybe drunk. Red was still coherent, but Flower was definitely borderline wasted. She barely talked. My friend and I are facing the DJ booth, because there's a light show. There's a lot of people dancing, particularly grinding, which is a very common dance at a nightclub. A guy approaches Flower, and they start dancing, her backside pressed into him. So, at first I thought it was her boyfriend, or a date, with how immediately familiar they seemed. I didn't think anything of it, just two people dancing. My friend is talking to Red, facing away, and watching the laser light show, as well as am I. You can barely hear anything in this place. The music was really loud. But I heard the guy dancing with Flower ask, "What's your name?" And she doesn't answer. She isn't talking. In this moment, I knew maybe she was too drunk, and I took note of that. But they continued dancing, and so did the rest of us. A few minutes later, I look over, and Flower looks visibly uncomfortable. Her eyes are glazed over, and she's sweating beads. Red is nowhere in sight. I look at them, and my eyes move downward, and the guy has his hands in her underwear, touching her down there. I know she didn't consent to that, because she didn't even speak to him, and we were in public on the dance floor. Immediately, I ask her if she's okay, and the girl who didn't speak all night says, "No." Something came over me in that moment. I look over at the guy and scream at him, "Get the fuck off her right now." He says something back to me in my face, to his defensive, but I didn't even listen. I didn't even care about what the hell he has to say. In a millisecond, I realize I cannot take this man, and it is a packed place. I couldn't find security. I grab him by the shoulder, look him in the eye, with the most crazed look, but calm demeanor. I say, "Get the fuck out of here, and leave, right now." He puts his hands up, and says, "Okay," and leaves. I turn to Red, who has suddenly made herself present. I grab her by the shoulder, and I say to her, "Your homegirl is not okay right now." She says okay, a surprisingly tame reaction, and they leave. Immediately after this, I pull my friend aside and tell her what happened. She is in utter disbelief, because she had no idea that was happening in the slightest. We talk to security, give him a description, grab another drink, and make sure he is made to leave. But after a little, we are dancing again, and I make eye contact with that pervert on the dance floor. He never left. I really believe that I saved that girl from something incomprehensibly horrible happening to her. I will never forget the smirk on that guy's face. Please be safe out there. This happened some time ago. I live in a town called Prijedor, in Bosnia. One night in July, I was riding a bike when a bearded guy stopped me and started speaking with me. He seemed nice, so I continued talking. At the end, he said he was gonna introduce me to his daughter. Weird, but I thought he was joking. Then, I didn't see him again until November. Me and my friend, Amir, were walking to the local convenience store. Then, the bearded guy saw us and called us into his home to warm up, since it was snowing. His house was the house where one old man lived. So, I went, because I thought he was his son. He confirmed he was the son of that man, but that he went on vacation, and he is taking care of the house while he is away. I recognized the granddaughter of the old man, so I was relieved. I thought this was just a friendly man, and not some psychopath. We continued to the convenience store, and as we were headed back, we saw Amir's girlfriend, who drove us back. As we were driving, 2 police cars passed us. We then saw 3 police cars parked in front of the house of the old man. The old man was on vacation, and his daughter and 2 granddaughters stayed to take care of the house. The thing is, he had 2 daughters and no sons. That man came into their house and threatened them to pretend like they were his family. The daughter took a chance while he was out and called the police. Unfortunately, it didn't end there. Later that night, I heard bangs on my door. I saw him through the window. He was yelling something, but I didn't hear what. I called the police, but he escaped. Last month, I found out he was arrested. He was a member of a religious Salafi cult. They are unfortunately present in high numbers in Bosnia. He was framed for assault and pedophilia, and married a minor. I have now fully recovered from this traumatic event. I will preface my story with the fact that my dad, a prominent surgeon in California in his time, had a business partner, another surgeon, who actually was in fact one of the victims of the Golden State Killer. That had happened before I was born. And growing up, I never really knew of the story, nor understood why he was such a paranoid helicopter dad. I found out years later about it, and that he had had several experiences, which led him to believe he, like his business partner had been, was being stalked by Joseph James D'Angelo Jr. Now, in retrospect, I believe what happened to me was one of them. Anyways, when I was 5 years old, my mom and I were home alone in a house that we just moved into. My dad was away on a business trip. I was in the kitchen watching Harry and the Hendersons, and my mom was in a room upstairs. Our kitchen was pretty big, and the TV was in a nook in the corner. There was a couch right next to the TV, against the wall, facing out, not facing towards the TV. So I was actually sitting on the ground, with my back up to the side of the couch, like 2 feet from the TV, staring up at it. There was this massive picture window next to the TV, but I would imagine anyone looking inside wouldn't have seen me there on the ground in the corner. On the opposite side of the room from the couch was a door to the garage that had one of those long, flat handles. As I was sitting there, I began to hear a creaking sound, and looked over to see the handle moving up and down. I still get chills remembering being alone in that big dark room, illuminated only by the flickering of the TV, and seeing that handle moving up and down by itself. As soon as it stopped, I leapt up and sprinted up the stairs, screaming to my mom that someone was trying to get into the house. She was upstairs with the windows open, and we both heard the crunching of feet running away on the driveway. She immediately called the police, and they came out and did a search of our property, and found nothing. They chalked the event up to it being just a prowler. I count my lucky stars every day that door was locked. The scariest part is there were 2 doors to the garage, one on the kitchen side and the other on the side of the stairs that went from a laundry room to the garage. And we found that one to be unlocked. It was pure chance that they tried the locked one first and got scared off before they could try the other one. I truly believe if whoever was there hadn't heard me scream and run up the stairs in that moment, they would have made it inside. It now makes sense to me that we moved 6 times before I turned 5, based on the fact that my dad had had odd experiences of break-ins at 2 other homes in the same neighborhood, where nothing was taken, but someone had clearly forcefully entered the home. I think that it was a distinct possibility. He wasn't caught until 2018. Halloween Day, 2015. My daughter was 8 at the time, and not excited to trick-or-treat at all. She kept saying, "Mom, I have a really bad feeling. Something bad is going to happen." I kept trying to reassure her that it was just nerves, especially since there were a lot of clown costumes that year, and she's not a fan. So, we meet up with my sister and her 2 kids to trick-or-treat in her neighborhood. We did see a few clowns riding 4-wheelers. So I said to my daughter, "See, that's what you were worried about? It's just kids dressed up." We finished up trick-or-treating with my sister and drive back home, stopping at a gas station briefly. We had pulled into a designated parking spot, and a car was parked near us, but with their rear end facing my daughter's passenger back door, where she was seated. All of a sudden, the lady drives in reverse, backing directly into my daughter's door, and our entire car moves. I'm like, what the hell? And now my daughter is screaming and crying. I get out of the car to check on my kid, to make sure that she has no injuries. She's okay, but upset. Then the crazy lady of the other car takes 2 young boys out of her car, whom are barefoot and in pajamas, and is screaming at me not to call the cops. Obviously, I dialed 911, and while I was waiting for their arrival, this lady takes the 2 boys and goes into a bar across the street. Cops show up, and I say, she went into that bar over there with 2 children. She must have called someone, and they told her to return to the scene of the accident. So she comes back, and we are yelling at each other. And who shows up but my ex-boyfriend? Yes, he is now dating the crazy lady. So, she hit my car so hard, it had to be realigned, and the whole 9. I didn't think she had car insurance, the way she was acting, and screaming not to call the cops. The whole way home, my daughter said, "See, Mom, I told you something bad was going to happen." She was right, and I will never dismiss her feelings again. Also, she is 17 now, and absolutely hates Halloween, and refused from then on to go trick-or-treating.